A lot of the research 30 years ago was definitely done in silos. Silos of funding, silos of knowledge, and a fear of change. Now, if you look at the research and the publications, even in the last year, actually, these boxes, these constructs that we've described are not real. How do you know it's just ADHD if you don't rule out the other things?
It's a bit like going for a blood test and only testing for one thing.
So what you end up is a system that says those who shout loudest get to the front of the queue. If you have got money, you bypass the queue, but the people in the greatest need get pushed back even further. And that's a real problem.
We've had such a great response to the podcast, and so many of you have been in touch asking what you can do to help. It's really simple. Just follow, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. That way we can reach more people, and that way we can celebrate these great minds that think differently. Our next guest is a true champion of neurodiversity. Amanda Kirby is a doctor, academic, teacher, researcher, tech entrepreneur, and a proud parent to a neurodivergent family. As the co-founder and CEO of Do It Solutions, she is leading the way with innovative, accessible tools to support neurodiverse individuals in education, justice, and employment. With 4 decades of experience and a commitment to evidence-based solutions, Amanda is a globally recognized leader in this field. She's an absolute legend, and I'm really excited about this one. Let's dive in. Let's see how great minds think differently. Amanda, it is finally amazing to actually have you in the green chair. For people listening or watching, I mean, the letters after your name are longer than your name. So you have 16 letters after your name.
I've never counted them. And I can't actually tell you what they all are.
You've been in this world of neurodiversity across so many different aspects of it, seeing it from so many different sides, personally and professionally, and for 40 years.
Makes me old.
And I'm 41.
And that makes me even older.
And I'm not here to make you feel old, but what was it like 40 years ago?
There was a lack of knowledge generally. There was a lot of siloed information. So I got into this. I was a GP working in a practice where I was working in adult psychiatry. I'd worked in paediatrics. And my middle child, who was a bit of a late walker, I spoke to the paediatrician who I knew, a paediatric neurologist, and she saw him and she said, I think he's got developmental coordination disorder. Sorry, what? And I started on this journey going, what does that mean? We started going to istenologists. And what I realised very quickly was that they ask you the same questions again and again and again and again and again, and they look at parts of your child but not the whole child. So I realised pretty quickly that if this was my experience of getting lots of letters after his name, of which most people didn't understand. So I'd say when he went to school, he was dyspraxic, and the teacher would go, you mean dyslexic? And I'd go, no, I don't. And I had to develop quite a sort of tough outer layer to go, no. And then I wrote what dyspraxia was down, and this was the start of everything. Oh, God, I need to educate people. That was a mistake, which changed my whole life. So there was a problem. We had silos of education, health, silos within health, right? Lack of knowledge around, certainly about conditions like DCD. ADHD was thought of naughty kids.
Sure. Boys.
So, boys, right?
White boys.
White boys. Autism was definitely white middle class boys, right? And if you were getting help, you today, if we wind on, you had to be motivated and articulate. And there was a lack of information. And now that's changed. There's far more information out there, but the service design predominantly is only just starting to change now. So I then set up the clinic, started knowing that I needed to document things very carefully from the get-go to prove to people what I was doing was not funny stuff, that I was documenting, gathering information, and then I started publishing the work very carefully, and then I started supervising PhD students, thought I better do it myself. I better get one of those. I became a professor, thought I'd better get a PhD.
I'm amazed. I'm sort of amazed, but then it's totally understandable that you had to go and find all this proof.
It was selfish.
Yeah.
It was, honestly,
Sure.
this has been a selfish journey.
Sure, and being selfish is not always a bad thing, right?
No, but I needed to know, how could I help and support my son, who was brilliant and wonderful, to be his, I hate this sort of phrase,
Authentic
best self, all that stuff, but to show what he can do and get on in the world, right?
Yes.
And that goes for my next generation as well, because I realise now, a wildly neurodivergent family.
And so what was going on with your brain then 35, 40 years ago?
Oh, first of all, it's taken a hell of a long time for me to realise I'm neurodivergent, even though everybody around me goes, of course you are, right? Because as a child growing up, first of all, you recognise I'm a woman, right? So my labels, what was tagged to me was very little because I hid it. So at that time, when I was growing up, I was highly anxious, verbally really keen in class. I would always be very chatty, couldn't get it down on paper.
Okay.
I wasn't going to get into medical school. But this was the rhetoric. And because I wasn't so good in exams, then I would get more anxious. And the more anxious I got, then it became a performance thing.
Yes.
Right. And then I would sleep the night before, and I would then get into a whole tiz and everything. So over that time, I was really worried about what other people thought. It's taken me a hell of a long time. Only now, a little bit less am I bothered about what people think. I do care far less now.
Do you remember a time or a moment where the mirror was held up and you were kind of like, oh, I'm in this. I'm in this.
Yesterday? Not that long. Well, not yesterday, but not that long ago.
Okay.
For a long time, because women, that thing of women don't have ADHD.
Yes.
And I always use the sort of analogy is that the list for ADHD was zebra list,
Yes.
but I'm a horse.
Yes.
Right? And I didn't fit the zebra list because I'm pro-social, I'm not a nuisance, so I don't come across with impulsivity in the same way. So it's only in the last few years.
Okay.
Really,
Okay.
which is a bit ridiculous when I've seen clinically thousands of people and my family members. If I now go back and I go, we've got autism, we've got dyslexia, developmental language disorder, dyspraxia.
What's changed from 40 years ago to now?
Awareness has increased.
Yes.
We're having this conversation. We wouldn't have had that 40 years ago. The language has changed. So we've gone from, we're still hearing specific learning difficulties, but I think it's the first time I've seen some commonality of language.
Okay.
So neurodiversity, this concept is being used by health, it's being used by education, it's being used by justice, it's being used by employment.
Government.
So this is crucial because we had learning difficulties and disabilities, we had specific learning difficulties, neurodevelopmental disorders, special educational needs, lots of different terms being used.
Okay.
And it was a bit like sort of in, out, shake it all about, right? So you'd have LDD in justice wouldn't include some things. Specific learning difficulties wouldn't include other things.
Okay.
Right? And so there were a lack of understanding around co-occurrence or overlap across the conditions.
So we've got a tent pole.
So we've got a central point where there is some commonality of language, not only just in the UK, but we're starting to get that globally. That is
amazing.
Massive.
That's amazing.
Massive. And honestly, I think it's ground changing because even though we see neurospicy, neurominorities and neurodifferences and neurotypes and all sort of emerging language, which is great because language changes all the time, but we have that sort of central construct. Definition of it, not necessarily consistent, right?
Agree.
I don't like the sort of phrase the neurodivergence and the neurotypicals because it goes sort of othering and it puts some people in one box and it means you have to be defined and fit into a box.
Yeah,
so,
and if you don't, where do you go?
Where do you go? And if you're not bad enough or good enough, you're in or you're out, So there's lots of other things that we can talk about that. So, but that's interesting. The language has changed.
I call them the sort of neuro-linguistic police. Can you say neurodivergent? Can you say neurodivergence? Can you say neurodiversities? Can you say, I think the point that you make is incredibly sage, that if we can actually have some commonality of having a word, let's make it simple, neurodiversity, that can encapsulate or at least be the start of a conversation.
Yeah.
That, guess what? Who knew it? Everyone's brain's different. Ta-da!
Ta-da! And that's an important da-da.
It is really
Honestly,
important.
it's a fundamentally... And also, the second bit of that is our brains change throughout our lives.
Yes.
So that's a really important second bit to that. Because otherwise we go, you are neurodivergent today, and this is who you are. You've got your ticket. And I had a conversation with somebody actually on a call yesterday where they said, he's got a diagnosis of autism, they'll know what to do. So I said, well, no, it's not true. Because who he is today, when he moves into the first workplace, the place you're in, the tasks you're doing, people you're with, there's a whole lot of other things that you need help and support. And also, who I am today, you said, who I am today, well, I've got glasses on and I can't see much without them now. But when I was 40, I didn't need glasses.
Yeah.
And maybe in 10 years' time, I might need hearing aids. Our brains are changing and the way we process information and communicate. And who knows, you can knock your head, have a traumatic brain injury. People can develop multiple sclerosis. Our brains are changing dynamically throughout our lives.
And our circumstances change, and therefore we change, and we adapt to, and our brains adapt to circumstances, and whether that's, personally, career, etc.
Yeah.
Like we change our perceptions, we change our views on things.
We do. So that's the thing about neurodiversity, just conceptually saying, accept that people's brains think, act, process, communicate. We move differently. And then think about how we include people in society rather than exclude people in society. How do we make society include people who do things in not a typical way or an average way?
Yes.
Because we set up society, we set up education in an average way.
But the funny thing is average and the definition of average and normal can also change. And that's what's really exciting.
Hugely. I'm 5'2", so in some, and I'll be 5'1" at some point in time, but in some countries I might be seen as average height.
Yes.
In other countries I would be seen as short.
Yes.
Right? So what is average or typical in one society is completely atypical. So when people go 15% of people are right? Well, it depends on how you're sampling, depends on how you're defining, depends on who's in or out, and we will change throughout time. So neurodiversity as a concept, I think, is a really useful to have that discussion. What does that mean for you?
Yes. Why are we obsessed with labels?
At the moment, we're obsessed because I think we've often been obsessed because I think as a parent, we're worried about if we don't get a label for our child, we won't get resources. And certain labels get you more. So there's sort of golden tickets. So at the moment, the golden tickets for resources seem to be autism and ADHD. Mm-hmm. It's interesting because I always bring this up, which is developmental language disorder, which is about 7.5% of kids, as opposed to autism, 1 to 2% of children, has great impact, and we see lots of children excluded from school with developmental language disorder, undiagnosed, but DLD gets you less resources. And there's good research showing that.
Yeah.
So the label you get is important. And if you perceive that label is going to get you more support, you will go for it. If it's got kudos or it explains and gives you a framing to sort of make an explanation of, right, that's why I do this and this is how I do that. And now I've got a narrative to be able to help me, then it makes more sense to people. And at the moment, ASD and ADHD are having their time.
I'm guessing, therefore, the medical industry needs labels and boxes also.
Well, yes, but no. I would like them not to have quite so narrow labels. So if we look at the international classification for conditions like ADHD or for autism, and you go back to the 1950s with the first iteration of autism, it was under the schizophrenia barrier, right? So it's changed over the years. So it's a bit like your recipe for something's changed. So how you describe the same label is now the descriptions have changed completely. And it's a bit like that in, out. So people who would have got a diagnosis don't have a diagnosis. People who do have a diagnosis now wouldn't have got a diagnosis before. Yeah. So it's changing a lot. And I think that's an interesting thing.
Yeah, and I assume that given this is in some ways still such new territory, and we still don't really know a lot about the human brain, actually, this will keep changing.
It will, but if you look, I think what's changed, you were thinking about what's changed over the last 40 years as well, is that we understand that genes are terribly messy, that our brains are terribly messy. We've got 3,000 plus different brain types of brain cells, right? So just 84 billion brain cells. And we go, and we do like horoscopes. So what are you?
Yes.
Are you Capricorn or ADHD, right?
Yes.
Which one are you going to go into? And you choose a box, right? Now, if you go back to what's changed as we understand the complex genetic really variable genes. And 40 years ago, a lot of the research 30 years ago was definitely done in silos. So we were looking at ADHD genes, we were looking at ASD genes, we were looking at dyslexia genes. Now, if you look at the research and the publications, even in the last year, lots of stuff looking at transdiagnostic frameworks and going, actually, these boxes, these constructs that we've described are not real. They are, but they're not neat.
I'm right in saying, I think, that 10, 20 years ago, I would not be able to be autistic ADHD from an assessment and a diagnostic perspective.
You couldn't have both. You couldn't have both. If you were autistic, that said you couldn't have DCD, you couldn't have ADHD.
Yeah.
Now, people talk about orders or adders or, talk about letters after your name. But if you're a little blah, 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 because actually that's the reality, you're a bit of this, bit of that, bit of that, and you don't fit. So who misses out often are people who don't fit, are not bad enough in one area.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And actually that's the commonest pattern. But when you look at research, people look at people who are classically something. So the research has been based on a small number of people who are classically something, whereas the vast majority are not actually fitting into these neat silos of which the diagnostic boxes are there. And I think there is a move. So you're starting to see clinicians going, we need to have neurodevelopmental services, not just ADHD and autism. We're still focusing very much on ADHD and autism at the moment. And I keep going, but are you screening for DCD? And they go, no, we don't. Well, if 70% of people with autism are dyspraxic, why are you not?
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're just helping somebody's head and neck and forgetting about the rest of their body.
Yeah.
Right? So there's still a way to go, even though we've got the evidence.
I feel like it's real new news that you can be more than one thing. I think that's new news.
I know, but it just shows how long it takes to get news. So a lot of the research being done in the 1990s all the way through. There's so much research showing about overlap as the rule rather than the exception. And it shows how long it takes to permeate into common knowledge.
Okay.
And also shifting people's behaviour, right? So if you're a specialist in dyslexia and actually you need to recognise that half the people that you see have got dyspraxia, you've now got to recognise you need to understand that, and people don't want to shift. Or if your specialism is ADHD, and I saw this the other day in a report of a kid being diagnosed for ADHD, but there was no screening for other neurodevelopmental conditions. And I'm thinking, how do you know it's just ADHD if you don't rule out the other things?
It's a bit like going for a blood test and only testing for one thing.
Exactly.
And not going, well, let's just do a full workup.
Yeah, but if I came to you or you came to me and you said you were tired, I would do, are you anemic? Are you hypothyroid? There'll be a number of tests I'd be thinking about going, what else could it be if it's not? And that's the same for ADHD. What else could it be if it's not ADHD, right? And it could be traumatic brain injury, for instance. And we've seen that. We've just been screening about 1,000 kids who've been excluded from school, and 3 to 10 times the rate of head injury in that group. Now, nobody asked the question.
Really?
So how do we know what the answer is if we haven't asked the right questions, right? So we're sometimes jumping and assuming something is ADHD without checking what else could it be or what is alongside it. Even though the evidence base is there, we should be screening across, because our brains aren't only focusing on ADHD. That's why I don't understand ADHD coaching. What, you're only doing ADHD. You're not going to do coaching for the other bits, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't quite make sense. You're coaching a person.
The assessment clinics that are like, we just do one thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I guess you then wind back to what are psychologists and psychiatrists learning and studying, and therefore understanding what's happening in medical school, and like, what is the education side of people being able to not A, have very little information, and B, not have just only siloed information. It kind of feels like we're a little bit in danger of putting the cart before the horse.
We are.
And getting carried away, and then having to go, oh, hold on a minute. Oh, you know that ADHD waiting 10-year waiting list? Now it's 20 because all those dyslexics, they've all kind of cottoned on that they're probably ADHD as well, and some of them have tried some medication. It's made a big difference, and so they're all the dyslexics are now on the ADHD. I mean, I'm making this all up, but I'm sort of not in terms of what could happen.
Well, it's happening.
Happening.
It is happening because we've got waiting lists of, 7, 10. I think the other day somebody said 22-year waiting lists or something, right? So we've got awareness, which is growing, which is great. Interest in understanding why my child or adult, why my child isn't progressing as they should. So then we've got people who don't know there's a system, who've got high level of need way back now, right? So the children with the greatest need have just not got a hope in hell of being seen because the parents may not have the digital literacy, the language, the knowledge, the awareness. They may have ADHD themselves. They're getting round to, when somebody says, write your history. So what does that mean?
Yeah.
So what you end up is a system that says, those who shout loudest get to the front of the queue. If you have got money, you bypass the queue and you go elsewhere, and then you see that increased of services to respond to that.
Yes.
It's a market demand.
Yes.
But the people in the greatest need get pushed back even further. And that's a real problem. And particularly those who are not bad enough in one category. And those are often the children who are excluded from school. They're often the youth that end up in youth offending. And they're often the adults that end up in prisons, and they're all homeless. And we've got lots of research to back that up.
Those 4 categories of people that you've described there, Amanda, they're all forms of exclusion.
They are. It's about inequity and poverty. So it's not that neurodivergent traits are criminalising or make you naughty. It's the difference is that if I look in my family, my children, grandchildren are fortunate to have their support needs identified and get intervention early, and they're doing well academically, right? Yeah. But it was useful. But I can see that our narrative is so socially different if your impulsive behaviour is seen as you're naughty. And I can see that. I read a report of a child the other day, and it said, and this child has got a diagnosis of ADHD. And the school report said he needs to take responsibility for his behaviour and learn to focus and manage his time better. And you're going, hello? Especially as he moves through the school. And you're going, hello? Because this is a challenge. And if you're presenting information in a format that he can't digest, you can't. It's like getting somebody who's visually impaired to look harder and then they'll see.
Yes,
right?
It doesn't work.
It doesn't work. So we've got lack of knowledge, lack of information, training. You talked about GPs. I remember as a GP trainee, even 100 years ago, is that we have very little training. And even now there is some, but it tends to be again in diagnostic silos.
What do you say to people when, whether it's parents or colleagues or people you meet within your work, when they're saying, oh, my child might be, Amanda, or I might be, what should I do? What is that first step that gives the best chance of the best possible door and therefore the route through the quote unquote system?
Listen to what are challenges for them. Don't jump to boxes. That's the first thing. Because 2 children with dyslexia, one can have reading difficulties, one can have spelling difficulties. And if you jump to somebody's dyslexia, you'll just give them a list of things to do and half of them won't work. And parents get dispirited because we tried this, it didn't work. No, Of course, because they haven't got problems with spelling. So you're spending time doing that stuff when it's not relevant. So listen, capture information to understand the profile of that child's strengths and challenges. Check a developmental history. So I want to know what it is and what it's not. So I need to do that in my head, the differential diagnosis. What was their development like? What's their language? What's their communication? Go back to the definition of neurodiversity, different ways we think, act, move, process, communicate. So check those things out, right? And then you start to build a picture. Then you go, okay, where do they thrive? That's important. That gives me clues. So I'm a detective. So I'm going to know on these days it seems to be more problematic. Why on those days is it more problematic? Because they have to change for gym and then they're always late. That tells me something. So
but do you think it's normal that where neurodiversity is concerned, we ask where people thrive?
No, because the whole basis, I remember as a parent way back when, that the whole, and even now, the basis of a diagnosis is telling that you know, basically you go, when you go to see the diagnostician, just make sure you tell them everything that's bad that's going on. And on the worst day, because that's going to get the diagnosis. The diagnosis is not based on thriving. However, in life, which is ridiculous, because in life, I want to end up in a job where I thrive.
Yeah.
I want to know how I work well and what makes me work. So understanding my strengths, and that took me years to work out myself, you know, that I'm highly distractible, you know, that it's something's interesting, but how can I get into a sort of flow state? Understanding those things made an enormous difference to my productivity. It really did.
Yeah.
So understanding that early makes a difference to the parents as well, because, you know, I remember with my son, and we'd do his homework and he would be distractible, and then he would want to go and get a drink, and then he'd want to go and get a cup of tea, then he'd go and get me a glass of wine, you know, because I'd be like getting frustrated. But I realised him speaking through his ideas and thoughts allowed him to organise them, to get them down onto paper, then we'd write them down. And once I understood that process, hooray!
Yeah.
And it wasn't a battle with, I changed my framing, because I went away from thinking, oh God, he just doesn't want to do his homework, to that's why he does that.
Yeah.
So understanding how you thrive is it's those clues that make a difference.
Yeah, but I love that. I love that idea of, instead of it just being, what's wrong with you? What do you find difficult? What are your challenges? There are even more clues from what you're good at, what you like doing. You know, you start telling me that you're obsessed with X, Y, and Z, or you collect X, Y, and Z, or you love being in X, Y, Z. You know, those are as, if not more helpful than you're a bit anxious, or, you know, you don't like crowded rooms. You know what I mean?
It's bizarre. And I think about, you know, one of my grandchildren's fantastic at maths, you know, and got this amazing visual spatial memory. And if you do 720 times 35, and he'll come up with the answer, right? Incredible. To understand that, understanding how that brain works is going to be the door opening for future, you know, really is. So that's why I developed profiling system, look at strengths as well as challenges.
Yes.
Right? Because that's as important. I think it's much more motivating to go, right, how do we maximize the way you use your strengths? And I don't like the superpowers narrative particularly. I'm really not madly keen on that. Because actually,
why are you not madly keen on the superpower narrative?
Because not everybody's got a wonderful life who are neurodivergent. 50% of people in prison are neurodivergent. They're not having a wonderful life. That's the first thing. They're not all chief execs of amazing companies and they're having an incredible life.
So the 50% of people in the UK's prison system are neurodivergent.
Yeah, it could be, when we go back to definitions.
Yeah.
So what we know is that adversity plus neurodiversity has a cumulative impact.
Yep.
So that it's sometimes hard to go, is this neurodiversity or is this adversity or is it a combination of the two? So if you've been excluded from school, then you haven't been in school to learn to read. Could you be dyslexic and not had lessons learning to read? So getting the definitions and the numbers is high. We know that about 75% of children in youth offending have speech, language and communication needs. Much higher than 50%, okay?
Yes.
We know that ADHD traits I say traits because then when we ask the right questions, some of them have traumatic brain injury. And we've measured that. We've done about 100,000 screenings in prison. So we've got large data sets which we're publishing and we've published. And we can see a high level of TBI, traumatic brain injury. Some of those people are being quoted as having ADHD traits.
Okay.
But they may well be can't focus, can't attend because they've had head injury.
Interesting.
So when we look at the percentages, I always go percentage of what?
Yes.
And how we're defined. But with needs, non-identified needs.
Okay. Because it's, we had Sarah Templeton on some screenings that she's done. She's looking at 85%, and that's ADHD. And we didn't talk about TBI, for example.
And that's important.
Yeah,
because
that's an interesting, really interesting aspect.
And we've seen it. So we've published in youth offending, in females, in males, in large data sets, 11, 12,000 males, looking at the percentage they've had head injury. And if you don't ask that, you'll assume it's ADHD.
Yeah, so interesting because it basically just reinforces to me in some ways how some of these narratives that we put out there just can be so damaging, like the superpower narrative that, gathers steam and momentum.
You've got people who are neurodivergent who are doing everyday jobs, and they also don't have a choice of where they're going to be and the work they're going to do, and they have to take whatever's available, right? So I think I'm lucky. I do a job I love, and I've got the environment where I thrive. But most people are not as lucky as that. You tend to be in a place where you have to live and a job where you have to do, and you don't have some of those choices. So I think it's a misnomer to go, it's all wonderful. And also I think people have challenges. So when you think about somebody who's dyspraxic, who's got coordination difficulties, and learning a new skill takes longer, like learning to drive a car or ride a bike or handwriting, that's a challenge that needs help and support. It's not a superpower.
Yeah.
It's a bloody nuisance, right, to that person. If they can't join in, if the only games in school are football and you don't play very well and you're being excluded from that socially, that is a problem for you.
Yep.
It's not a superpower at that point in time.
The pushback that I see on the superpower piece is, yeah, but if I think it's a superpower for me, I can say it's a superpower for me. I think when I first heard that, I was kind of like, okay, sure, people can talk about themselves however they want to talk about themselves, and that's their freedom and right. Absolutely. And then I kind of thought, but I'm not sure that's necessarily still helpful.
It's a strength, right? To thrive in society, to thrive in relationships, to understand yourself better and what makes you work and what are the things that you're better at and not so good at, is about understanding you. Is that a superpower? I think that's just understanding yourself better.
Yeah,
right?
and a privilege.
And a privilege. When we go 60% of entrepreneurs are dyslexic, let's really investigate some of that stuff, because we look down into the data. We've got, a lack of data, lack of proper data. And was there an X factor there? Did they come from a middle-class family with social opportunities, that you had a net underneath you? So if you failed, you had somebody to pick you up who would pay for your rent that week, right? If you don't, then you have to take 3 jobs. And you might be resilient and you might be brilliant and you might overcome. But there's an awful lot of people who've lost their businesses who are entrepreneurs but not successful.
Yes. Yeah.
So your selection criteria
doesn't equal success.
It really doesn't.
It equals risk taker.
Risk taker, exactly. So I think we just got to be careful of this lovely, shiny, and it's great because then people are interested and they go, oh, that's great, and we'll recruit people. But if we want to get everybody who's able and capable into work, then we need to change the whole narrative to say, how do we make processes more inclusive? Otherwise, all we're doing is going, we want those people. We want the shiny people who are the superpowers. We want, autistic mathematicians. They're the ones we want. Yeah. We don't want those other people who are, you're a different sort of autism. No, we don't want you.
But I don't actually know of these so-called superpowers. I'm not, the obvious one is, okay, the Save on Autism side of Genius. I've not heard a someone with Tourette's saying that they have a superpower, or someone who's dyspraxic saying they have a superpower, or dyscalculic saying they have a superpower, or dyslexic saying they have a superpower. If I'm really honest, I feel like it's ADHD.
Yes.
ADHD is where,
And dyslexia.
And dyslexia, okay, where this superpower narrative happens.
But what's the power? I think, and what's super about it? Because at the same time as somebody's saying, I'm really good at this, we've all got really bumpy lives.
Yeah.
Right? And underneath that, we also hear, burnout and challenges getting in, sustaining work, relationships. And I think it doesn't tell the full story.
No, and look at all of the, the fairy tales and the superhumans and Supermans and Batmans and all of that sort of world of superpower. It ain't all rosy. Like, it's not one-sided.
It's not.
These are not perfect people.
But I think the other bit is people go back to the diagnostic boxes. I think then it becomes a narrative that sometimes people, this is generalization, people believe that once I get the diagnosis of ADHD, perhaps, that I'm going to know everything about myself, and then it's going to be wonderful. And then I see people, I've seen it personally, people getting a diagnosis in adulthood and grieve. They grieve their past. They're angry about what hasn't happened. And actually, they got a label, and because there's a diagnostic thing, but what happens next about, nuts and bolts. Okay, where are your challenges day to day? How do I help you organisationally? How do we help? Where are your areas of challenge at the moment that you need help and support? Let's direct that. And ADHD in itself it's a bucket label.
Why also, I guess, is there a strength of feeling that there's so much focus obviously placed on diagnosis and assessments and waiting lists and what's going on, public, private, access to that. How many different tests do I need to take? How do I even know what tests I need to take? And who does the tests and where do I go? And depends where you are geographically and how much money you've got and all the rest of it. And it's this big, like, orchestral kind of crescendo. And then nobody talks about what happens afterwards.
No.
And you're kind of given, personally speaking as well, you're given these keys or you're given this information, and then you've got to go and figure it out.
And that's why, if I turn back time, if I go back to when we set up an interdisciplinary clinic and bringing it together and then developing computer profiling systems and everything, it's about you. In the end, it's not about ADHD, although ADHD is slightly different because there's medication. So that's slightly different. But actually, in the end, what you want to know up front, with or without a label, is about your strengths and your challenges, and what you can practically do in the context of where you are, whether in school, whether you're in the workplace. Context is important. Yeah. So you can't provide the same guidance to a 16-year-old doing GCSEs to somebody who's in the justice setting who's got stress because they can't, take the dog for a walk. There are constraints in your environment as well. So understanding that. And I think that's where we have to move to, we've talked a little bit about personalisation, but ultimately giving you the label of ADHD, you're still the same person the day after as you were the day before. You've got something that you can try and find information of which that it's like a feeding frenzy out there to work out what's real and what's not. We see that recognition of what's real and what's not is becoming more complex in society as well, right? And then you're just seeing that there's lots of snake oil being sold now, right? And that worries me, really worries me, because I think people are in a vulnerable position. They're trying to seek some help and support, and they want advice and guidance which is robust. And there's an awful lot of rubbish, honestly. And I worry about that.
It's so complex.
Well, it's complex, but
I don't mean sort of.
I think it's complex, but it's simple, right?
Sure.
So I think we can make it simpler.
Yes.
Right? So if we go back to evidence-based, that we know that ADHD, dyslexia, if we're looking at some cognitive traits, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, we take labels for a second and then we'll just deconstruct the labels. Developmental language disorder, autism, dyscalculia, they all overlap, right? Lots of evidence to show that. And we know that most people have a mixture of things, okay? And if we look at underneath each one of those pillars, forget the label now and look at what that represents. So attention, concentration, focusing, sleep, a variety of things, okay? And then you go, okay, where are your strengths and challenges around that? Okay, level 1, let's provide, forget the labels, let's take that away, look at you, and this is your strengths and this is your challenges, and provide you in context with practical support. We do that today.
Yep.
I'm already doing that. That was my 25 years of work. I've been working in the justice system since 2007, right? 2006, I think it was. So it's nearly 20 years. People go, oh, that's interesting. Bloody hard work, right? In terms of understanding, but the context is important. So we can do that. And it started with paper, but we've now got computer systems, okay? So even today, we can do personalisation, practical guidance in context. It's possible. And if you do that, whether it's my stuff or anybody else's stuff, I don't care really. The point is that you can provide you with your own formula of strengths and challenges today in context. And we can refine it even more. So we can say, in the context of you being a driver, in the context of you working in a factory, in the context of you working in engineering, do all of that today.
But that's just about you. That's kind of like, well, everyone should do that.
Yeah, of course they should. So let's demedicalise it and personalise it.
Yes.
You can't just look at the cognitive bit. You also need to look at the well-being bit. Because you've got one brain. You don't go mental health today, neurodiversity tomorrow, right? 2 brains. No,
but we've only named, if the belief is that everybody on the planet has a different brain. Yeah. If that is a universal human truth,
we believe so,
that the world collectively can agree on, then all we've done is find, let's say, 20 names for 20 kinds of brains.
Yeah, which is a bit like horoscopes, as I said to you, right? It's as good as horoscopes.
And then we've gone, well, the other billion brains, we've only got one name for you: neurotypicals, norms, normal. I agree that it does need to be made simpler. It's not sort of simplifying, it's actually making it simple to kind of go, this is just about the individual. And that is a big challenge when society doesn't need the individual. It doesn't care about the individual.
Well, we like categorization. So we categorize insects and animals, and we like to say you're short or you're tall, you're employed or you're animal. We do that because large data is complex. We can't deal with large data, so we then categorize because it makes it easier to go, okay, well, if I know what you are, then I know what to do, right? So that's where I think IT systems can help, because you can do the categorization, because we can't do that, right? Because that's going to, and we know it takes too long. So if you've got a clinical service and people are trying to gather information, get it from here, get it from parents, get it from teachers, get it from the social workers, get it from the child, pull it together, and it's in paper and it takes hours to collate, and then somebody enters it. So that's like 24 hours to do all of that. And then somebody's got to integrate that information and then to collate it and to understand it. That's never going, well, it hasn't worked, right? So we have to use data to help the professionals who understand when it's collated. We need to decide who needs to be at the front of the queue.
Yeah.
Right. Who's got the greatest, because I'm interested in those who've got high risk, high need, the greatest complexity. If you can't tie your shoelaces, I should just be able to give you something to show you how to tie your shoelaces.
Why can't we?
We're capable of doing it today, right?
Yeah.
But we're driven by silos of funding, silos of knowledge, right? And a fear of change. So in order to look at the education system, which is under huge pressure, look at the employment system where we want to get everybody into work, look at the justice system where we've got increasing numbers in prisons, and we have shared systems. So this system doesn't talk to this system, and we use this language. We have to have common language and we have to have common systems. Now, there's a fear of that where we're sharing data and who owns the data.
Okay.
Right? So there is that.
Yeah.
But unless we start doing that, all we're going to be doing is going, which we're doing now, we're going to health, we're full. So education, it's your problem now. And education's going, oh, God, I can't deal with it. I've now got 25 out of 30 children in my class have got special educational needs. How do we work upstream? And we need to go employment. This is worthwhile us training parents. This is worthwhile us training education because it can have an impact here. We need to support GPs. I often go back to my core. Family doctors are an amazing resource.
Yep.
I knew my patients, right? There was a value in that because I didn't only know Mrs. Jones who was coming through, but I knew her family. I knew her grandchildren. I knew that when she was coming in and she was complaining about headaches, she was worrying about her daughter who was ill as well, right? That's huge knowledge that you build up that actually has an amazing, it saves you hours, weeks, months of detective work as a doctor.
Yes.
And I think we've lost that. And I know that's difficult, but I do think general practice as a gatekeeper is a very cost-effective way of supporting people. Because what we've seen is that I listened yesterday, I think, about A&E waits.
2 days.
Terrible. They were like one place, 50 hours. 50 hours, right? You can't even imagine.
For an emergency.
You can't even imagine sitting there you can't even imagine. You know, horrendous, isn't it?
Yes.
So we need to go back to our gatekeepers need to be not gatekeepers but enablers, right? But I remember that we had local authorities that had special needs coordinations in the local authorities, and they were brilliant. They would go out to the schools, do advice. There were educational psychologists who would go out to the schools and advise, and they were able to provide that layer of support which stopped the flow to health because then you only referred those children when you'd put in strategies and everything already.
Yep.
And then supporting the parents. And I think we have to go there. That has long-term consequences all the way through. Education, exclusion rates have gone up.
Yes.
We're seeing prison rates going up as well, employment rates, all of those things. And I think we have to start there.
So if I give you a magic wand.
Yeah.
Yeah, are you excited about that?
I am. I'd love a magic wand.
You're the neurodiversity fairy godmother, Amanda. I give you a magic wand. What do you do?
One, training of GPs and looking at the GP system, nurse practitioners as well, I think are enormously valuable. GPs are very good at taking a history, doing a differential diagnosis. Incredibly, that is something you learn to do. 10 minutes, you can go wheat from the chaff, or I'll see you again and build up. So I would pour resources into primary care. I would do training with the teachers that they've got an understanding, not in silos of dyslexia, ADHD, like that, but thinking about developmentally, what do I expect a child of 7, 8, 9, 10 to do? To identify those children who are not doing what you'd expect. They're in a perfect position. You've got 30 kids that can stand on one leg and one kid can't. That kid's got a problem.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, we need to look at it. So it doesn't take rocket science to do that, but to provide them with resources, not reinvent the wheel. I publish stuff all the time, freely available, right? And
Amanda's written 9 books, by the way.
You know, it's not rocket science to go, here's a fact sheet on tying shoelaces and using cutlery. But every local authority generates their own, right? That seems ridiculous. So we need to have a UK library of free resources that are freely available that anybody can access where it's got functional guidance, which is recognised. Let's not keep reinventing that. That would save billions.
So use digital.
Digital, but and translatable and accessible.
Yep.
So if English isn't your first language, it's freely available. And we don't need to replicate that 27 times across different authorities. Third thing I would do is that this will save the country billions, is that I would stop extra time in exam and just give everybody extra time. Because the whole system that says you have to jump this hurdle to get this label, to get 25% extra time is inequitable, because the only people who get a diagnosis will those who've been able to get a diagnosis, and those people will be of a certain, social capability. So it's an inequitable system that is failing millions. So just give everybody, if it's a 2-hour exam, make it 2.5 hours.
All the dyslexics I've met have said, "Oh yeah, got extra time at school."
Well, if you give me
help me.
No, if you give me, well, it's we've gone from the industrial era, which is like we've got to do things in a formulaic way, and so 25. It's apocryphal. There's no evidence for 25%, right? Okay. It's like saying everybody has size 5 shoes, right? Okay. We only give out 5 size shoes. That would save billions, right? Because it would mean that I don't have to know that I am dyslexic. I don't need to have a label to show that I am. I don't need to prove that I am. And actually, what happens if I'm not bad enough? You get nothing. So that's not fair, right? And it's inequitable. Because if you look at socially, children who are excluded from school rarely get extra time on exams because they don't have the diagnosis and all the rest of it, right?
So GPs, schools, extra time.
Extra time.
Do you want another one?
Oh, yeah, you keep going. I think freely available information, which is freely available information that's understandable, practical and functional. You know, I think we get as professionals, we go, very protective that you have to see the professional to get to be told how to help with time management. Provide it in different formats so people can utilize that information, you know, and we've got these days, we can do it in cartoon, we can do it in video, we can do it. There's nothing stopping us do that. And actually a core bank of information across the age span would help the 80-year-old who's got time management difficulties, whose cognitive functioning might not be as good, as well as the 50-year-old who's juggling the sandwich generation to the 20-year-old at university. It doesn't matter, right? Yep. So I would get going with that tomorrow, right? And then I think that general information means that people can have better conversations. In workplaces, managers are being told, you need to know about neurodiversity. And they go, so I'm going to tell you about ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia. And they're going, oh, God, I didn't know what I didn't know. Yeah. Now I know that I didn't know it. I'm not having any conversation because I could end up in a tribunal because I've said the wrong thing. Yeah. So we need to take that away and talk about managing people.
God, it's cruel that if I think that I love learning, and when I want to understand something, I want to get to the bottom of it. And being diagnosed autistic, right? I want to get to the bottom, and it feels so incredibly cruel to be saying to managers in companies, you got to know about all this now.
You don't. Oh, you don't. Why? You know, they don't need to know about asthma. No. They don't need to know about diabetes or bunions or bronchitis. Why are you suddenly saying they need to know about how to communicate effectively with the people they manage?
100%.
They need to look at are there training gaps that need help with
strengths, weaknesses,
you need to understand your own communication because it might be you're the problem, right? Not there is a problem. Put the problem in the middle, right? Yeah. Not the person's the problem, there's the problem. Yep. And let's look at what the problems are and deconstruct it. And go away from, and we've seen it, there's a move in the States of moving away from EDI.
Okay.
Which is interesting. Equity, diversity and inclusion. And I think it's because people go, oh, right, oh no, God, we've had health and safety, now we've got EDI, you know? And they go, oh, now what? What next? And you become resentful.
I don't want to get it wrong. I don't want to f*** up.
And the tribunal cases, it's my hobby.
This is a great one.
Sounds sad, isn't it?
No, I love it.
So I look at tribunal decisions, right? So I'll go every so often, I'll go on, you can just go on and have a look at the tribunal decisions. There's a little search that you can look at dyslexia with the words. And then I read them. And they're really interesting because you can map out and also see what's going wrong. And, and it's terrible. I think going to tribunal is a terrible thing because I think everybody loses. You see the headlines, 300,000, somebody's won that. Nobody's won anything because that person will have destroyed relationships. They will have lost their job. Their mental health will have been impacted. It's awful. And what we've seen is tribunal cases going up. And it goes back to what we talked about at the beginning, which is around awareness. Awareness is driving activity. And businesses are going to go, we don't want, and this is why we've got this sort of pullback of EDI. We better not tell anything.
Yes.
What do we tell? How much do we tell?
Yes.
Right? And I think people are arriving in the workplace and they're going, what are you going to do for me?
Yeah.
And the Equality Act, it's my duty, and I have ADHD. What are you going to do for me?
Yeah.
And we're back to labels, right? And then they go, well, I've given them the stuff for ADHD because that's what I was taught on the training, and it hasn't worked.
Yes.
Because that person's actually got dyspraxia or DCD.
Yes.
So it doesn't work. It doesn't work. So we've got this problem at the moment where you've got tribunal increase, awareness increase. So it's a sort of perfect storm. And the only way it goes back to my magic wand is inclusive practice, universal design. The only way economically we can really reach more people is to look at how do we do things in a more equitable fashion, giving out questions to everybody, not saying tick the box and you get adjustments. That's a waste of time.
Yes.
And it's inequitable in so many ways. So just going, if you want some help, we want you to do your best in the interview and not even use the word adjustment because that sounds like I need to be adjusted, right? I'm revealing a secret. I hate all that.
Yes.
So this is what's going to happen. This is the interview process. This is who's going to happen. This is where it's going to happen. Give that information to everybody. Who cares, right? If you want people to feel as comfortable as possible, they need that information with or without labels. So I would, inclusive practice, take universal design principles and save billions.
Yeah, that would save billions. Talking of saving billions, maybe, or helping billions, maybe. So we have our green badges. Oh, I say that like I'm not wearing one. I've got one on right here for those that can see. A kind of green light, I guess. And they're really a symbol for, I guess, support and for being yourself. And you don't have to be autistic or ADHD to wear them, but they are about showing support for neurodiversity and thinking differently and being yourself. And so we'll give you one, obviously, Amanda, to take home. But I'd like to give you another one and ask you if you could give it to somebody and pass it on, who would that be?
Well, because I want to try and change the world, or at least the UK to start with, Keir Starmer. Because I think that if we are going to get out of some of the mess and the problem with education, the problem with health and injustice, we are going to have to be brave and think about how we deconstruct and reconstruct some of those challenges. And that why would any system, place, country want to see 20% of their population not functioning and being productive in society? So from an economic, employment, ethical point of view, it just seems the right thing to do. So I'd like a conversation with Keir Starmer and I want him to wear the green.
So let's send him a green badge. Yep. I think, there's a wonderful community groundswell. There's wonderful grassroots. There's loads of people. I know I feel like I've been quite negative this episode, but there's loads of people doing amazing work.
Amazing.
Like really incredible work with the right intentions for the right reasons and having an impact and making change.
Really big impact.
But that's half the story. For the first time, I feel like I'm saying, like, we need top down.
We do.
We really do need top down.
We do. Because we need both. We need to take the examples, and there are examples of some amazing campaigners, practitioners. I know people who are doing incredible work, not just in the UK but globally, and making change. And listening to them and capturing their voices is incredible, and learning at what works is incredibly important.
Yeah.
But I'm a pragmatist at the same time. And unless we change at the top as well, it's a bit like any organisation. Unless you get buy-in from senior leadership, then you won't get buy-in at every level because the boss needs to go, I support this wholeheartedly, for it to then everybody else go, okay, fine, I do too, and be able to vocalise that as well. So,
and all he needs to do is go, get on with it.
Wear that green button.
Yeah. I think this is important. Let's all make it happen.